I can do whatever I want.
Well, welcome to the February 21st meeting of CONA, Sarasota County Council of Neighborhood Associations. I'm Kathy Benz, and I'm the president. On our website, you'll find videos of our meetings and a calendar of our annual meeting projection for the year. And we have resource pages, and one includes meeting topics, special ones, that are CONA meetings of special interest, where I'll assemble a lot of resource materials for you all to look at. The meeting announcements go out to association representatives, and that representative of your neighborhood association would distribute the meeting announcements. If you're a member of a neighborhood association that is a member of CONA, you are a member. We've got a few statements regarding the easements. I forgot to mention, our membership fees are due now, and there's a form on the table which you should take to your treasurer or your officers for your association and submit it for payment. Christine Johnson of the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast is not able to be here this evening, and she was not able to get a member of her staff to be able to come. She gave me an update that included some information that has to do with the Bobby Jones golf course, and it looks as if it's on my printer at home. So the only thing I can do is just tell you that they did release some information, and there was a newspaper article this week about where they are, and I'd refer you to that. Also, their website has updates on it. And they're engaged in trying to arrange for conservation easements on 3 different projects at the moment. For the Celery Fields quadrants, and for the Bobby Jones golf course, and for Orange Hammock. And they're raising funds right now in order to acquire the property on Orange Hammock. So if your neighborhood is able to make a donation to that, it would be very much appreciated. And all you have to do is get in touch with me or to contact them, and that's the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast. And there's a link on our website, which is CONASarasota.org. And then it's /meetings. There would be some information there, but there's also information on our resource pages. Moving on to our neighborhood association reports. Tom, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, not at this time.
Then I'm going to go to Catherine D'Souza, please, of the Forest Lakes Country Club, if you'll come up. We need you to use the microphone, please.
Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay. We are new members, Forest Lakes Country Club Estates, HOA. There are 3 of our board members back here, so I'd like to introduce them briefly. Elizabeth Braithwaite, interim president. Deborah Rowland, secretary. And Chris King, co-chair of deed restrictions. The reason I wanted to talk to you for just a minute, we have started a program this year called Community Topics of Interest. We're doing this in conjunction with Southgate Community Association. We're using their center building, which was designed by Victor Lundy, for 3 evenings of information. We've already had 2. The third and final one for this season will be on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, Sustainable Remodeling. Why are we doing this? We're trying to engage our residents. We're trying to give them useful information that can be helpful to them and help improve their property values. If you would like a copy of our program flyer plus the 2 handouts that we've already given, please just raise your hand and one of the ladies will give you something. Okay, that's pretty much it. The topics we've covered so far are solar power, red tide, and as I said, the third one will be sustainable remodeling. If you're free on the 17th and would like to join us, we'd be happy to have you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much and welcome to CONA. Are there any local candidates running for the 2020 election here tonight? Good, because we need that spare time. CCNA, which is the City Coalition of Neighborhood Associations, will meet next on March 7th, and their topic is 5G wireless network effect on communities, and Transportation Master Plan update by Colleen Magoo. On April 4, they're going to discuss ranked choice voting. CONA meetings in the future. On March 20th, which is off of our regular schedule, rather than the second Friday, it's going to be the third Friday, like this tonight. That is going to be a blueprint for water quality improvement, and that will be John Thaxton and Steve Swaw. And on April 10th, Sean Sellers is going to present a program on the Central State toll roads. I'm trying to see. If you have a question that you would like to submit to possibly be answered or raised here, there are index cards over on the table. And also, if you raise your hand, an index card will be delivered to you along with a pen. And when you finish completing it, if you'll raise the card, someone will come get it along with the pen. And I'm going to dive right into our program right now because we've got a good number of speakers. And tonight, Melanie Goddard in the center here, who is our vice president and is also the president of the Gulf Gate community, is going to be the moderator and a participant in that she's going to start off with some discussion of the topic. And just to be clear, this is an informative panel where the people that have been gathered here are here to give you information on this topic. And it's a hot topic because there's a lot of concern by people about the topic, and there's legislation being proposed. But this gives the neighborhood perspective on the issue. And I'm going to turn this over to Melanie.
Okay, I want to just let the panel know we have to share the microphones. So there's one, Kathy, you're going to give one to, okay.
Yeah, but I will pick this back up later when we get to the point of questions.
Right. So before I begin, I would like each of our panel members just to introduce themselves and indicate where they're joining us from, so you have a perspective of the representation here. So, Jim, if you could start.
Yes,
Could you
Jim
have to use
Bennett.
you got to use the microphone.
I was 6 years as a member of the Venice City Council and a year on the Venice Planning Commission, 9 years in New Canaan Community, Connecticut as on the Planning and Zoning Commission and chairman of that body, and most of my career involved in municipal affairs, but I'm an international attorney, so it's an interesting mix. It's almost like a decaffeinated coffee. I'll go on to the next person.
Thank you. My name is Hagen Brody. I'm an at-large city commissioner with the city of Sarasota, elected in 2017. And I just wanted to thank you all for inviting me. This is my first time at CONA. During our election, our panel or debate was canceled at the time. So thank you all for coming.
Hi, my name is Chris Goglia. I'm the incoming president of the St. Armands Residents Association in the city of Sarasota. And about a month ago, I was invited to give a presentation to the City Commission about something that's popping up on the city's barrier islands. And we call that the hotel house problem, where single-family homes are being knocked down and huge buildings are being put up with 8 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and marketed as sleeping 25 people. And it's scaring everyone that lives nearby, and we're trying to work with the city to see if there's something we can do about it. Thank you.
Thanks. Dan Greenberg, I'm with the city of Sarasota, and the Development Review Planner. And it's the first time I've been in one of these meetings as well, so thank you for inviting me.
Can you hear him?
No.
I need to turn that up.
This way.
Yeah, you want to use this one now, and I'll turn that one up.
Dan Greenberg, that's a little much. Trying to tone it down. Dan Greenberg with the city of Sarasota and Development Review Planner.
Put the microphone closer to the microphone to your mouth.
And it's the first time I've been here.
No?
So thank you for inviting me.
I have a mic here.
Is that working?
It was me. Turn it on.
Is that working? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, my name is Cooper Levey-Baker. I'm a senior editor with Sarasota Magazine, and I did a feature about kind of this topic for our October issue, and I got copies of it here if anybody wants to read it afterward. So I just kind of know what people told me about, so I got really interested in the topic, and we decided to do a story about it. And it's a huge issue affecting communities all around the world. So happy to be here. I'm much more used to being on that side than on this side, so this is a first for me as well.
I think they can use that one.
My name is Jill Luke. I'm an elected commissioner in the city of Northport. I've been in there a little over 2.5 years, and actually this year I am vice mayor. I also sit on the Tourism Development Council. I have served on Visit Sarasota Marketing Council, and I'm currently serving as a board member of the EDC, Economic Development Council in Sarasota. I have heard every angle probably imaginable on this topic.
My name is Lourdes Ramirez. I'm president of an online blog called Siesta Community. My experience is that I was on the board of the Siesta Association for 9 years, of which I was president of that organization for 5. And I had a lot of fighting and experience on illegal rentals on Siesta Key. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm also president of a local Republican organization, and I wanted to talk about that aspect of property rights as well. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate, the point of this meeting is educational. We're reaching out to help our associations understand what's legal, what's not, how things are being enforced, and what the issues are. So we hope to end up with a little bit of guidance as to what each association can and can't do to address problems that they have or to encourage aspects of this that are helpful. So that's where we are. We're going to start out with a proper definition, which I'm going to turn to Dan Greenberg to speak to the city side of what is an acceptable rental and what is considered a code violation in terms of a short-term rental.
Thank you. The city does not, I'm kind of prompted here to define short-term rental, and I want to be clear that the city zoning code does not specifically define short-term rental. That doesn't mean that we can't get there to make a decision on what that is. It's just that we have other definitions in zoning code. For example, we have under the residential use categories, we have group living and we have household living. We define household living very specifically, and it excludes, I'm looking for my definition here, it excludes excludes group living, essentially, but it also speaks to the character of household living. It gives examples about the structures, the common areas, and what may be going on there. But specifically with terms of short-term rental, the city doesn't define that. So we have hotels, motels, transient lodging, and these are commercial uses. We have group living that's a residential use, but as far as allowing short-term rentals and single-family detached, which I think is the crux of the discussion here, we don't allow those for less than a week. Now, 1 week is the definition of household living, so at least a week is what people need to be staying in a house in order for that to be defined as residential household living. So anytime people are renting under a week, daily, nightly, things like that, that's not permitted in the residential zone district.
So unfortunately, the county code personnel were unable to make the meeting this evening. So I had met with Sandra Legay, who is the supervisor of the county code enforcement, and also the gentleman by the name of Charles Marchione, who works under Ms. Legay for the North County portion. And we talked about the difference between county and city, the crux of which is in the unincorporated county, anywhere that's not a city making its own rules, the county rules require a 30-day minimum rental. I hadn't realized that you do not have the right to rent 1 or 2 days and then wait 30 days and then rent again, which is how I had interpreted it. I think lots of people think that, but it was explained to me that it is 30 days. You need to rent for 30 days. That is what is considered the minimum acceptable rental period in the county. So,
Can I say
yeah,
something?
absolutely.
So just because this is the beginning of the conversation, and I'm familiar with most of the folks up here, I think the easiest way for us to think about this is really divide it up into 3 different categories and talk about them generally. So these are the 3 real kind of issues that we've separated this into and we're trying to address differently. One is obviously vacation rentals. That is a term I use generically to mean somebody that owns a second home or a third home or a commercial property and they want to rent that out on whatever Airbnb or internet, Craigslist, whatever they so choose. That's what I consider, and they rent out the entire property. So if I had a second home, I rent out the entire property. That's what I call a vacation rental. The second one is high occupancy rentals, which my friend on the left here is going to talk about. And that really doesn't have as much to do with the duration as it does with the number of people that are being, that these properties are being rented to. Sorry. And then the other term that I think we need to really separate from those is something I call home sharing, which is essentially if you have a 3rd bedroom or you live in your house you currently occupy and you have a mother-in-law suite in the back above the garage and you want to rent that out on one of those platforms or on your own with a sign in the yard, we're going to call that home sharing. I think that helps.
You want to talk to about accessory dwelling unit more specifically? I mean, that is what that's called.
Sure. I'm in favor of, so home sharing is something that I've been kind of a proponent of in the city, because currently we don't allow, or we are enforcing our code and interpret our code to not allow somebody from renting out a back bedroom or a mother-in-law suite or an accessory dwelling unit. There's a lot of benefits to it that I can go into, but I think it's really important to separate that from vacation rentals, where you have individual whole properties that are being rented out. and separate that from high occupancy rentals.
So that gives you an overview of what's out there and hopefully some ability to differentiate the different categories that we're talking about. I want to return to the definitions and talk briefly about how does the city and the county enforce infractions, what would be considered code violations. City being something different, obviously, than the way the county is going. So I'm going to turn it back to Dan to talk about that.
So is the question how we would go about looking into a potential call that we received about a property that may be renting out in a, we'll just say to a non-permitted use on the site. So first, we have a complaint-driven approach at the city of Sarasota. Obviously, we can't just be out there at all times surveying Sarasota City for potential Airbnbs. But if we receive a complaint, our staff looks into whether there's an advertisement or a link sent from the person who's making the complaint. If there's no advertisement or direct link to like an Airbnb advertisement, for example, for us to reference, we'll still go on there. We'll get on the site, on the platform, Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway. I'm aware there's a couple luxury home rental sites as well. So we're trying to stay up on all the different platforms. But we'll go ahead and look into those. We'll take a look at the map of the general area where the complaint was received, because we all know that the dot on the map of where the property is may not actually be where the property is. We'll take a look there. We'll look at some of the photos that we can obtain of the house or the property. We'll compare those to what we can find online. We'll see if we can make a match. If they take a picture of the facade at the front and it has the address, that's a lot easier for us to make a match than if there's really no photos of the house. There's nothing but the front yard. It's maybe interior photos. We don't have police powers. We can't just go to a property and demand entrance, demand to look at the backyard to try and check photos. So at best, if we think we have a match, we could go out and do a site visit. We could always ask for information. But short of people volunteering information and us finding a concrete match, being able to verify with certainty that somebody is advertising online or not, it's very difficult to take any steps. So if we can make that match, we can verify that somebody is advertising, then we'll go ahead and try and book it for longer than 7 days. And that's kind of our final step. Well, excuse me, shorter than 7 days, yeah, to see if they're limiting their rentals only to 7 days or longer. So if we can go ahead and do that, then we're starting to get a case going. But it's really a very extensive approach, as you can imagine, and people are getting more savvy. They're learning, okay, if I'm doing something I'm not supposed to, I need to conceal that fact. So the city is faced with a good amount of challenges as far as catching people that are operating illegally. That said, we're open to the conversations ongoing. A lot of our zoning code definitions are, I hesitate to use this word, but becoming somewhat antiquated. A lot of our language in here, the definition of household living, for example, was made prior to all these new rental platforms. So we're playing a little catch up like the rest of the country, and I know the conversation's ongoing, with respect to the vacation homes and these different types of properties that are being constructed. But that's just an ongoing conversation we'll have with the city attorney.
So actually, the county is very similar, and I think one of the key points to point out here is probably the vast majority of properties that are being used in this way, in a short-term rental. What we're referring to as short-term rental, as Mr. Greenberg has pointed out, the city doesn't use that particular term, but we're talking about less than the allotted time stipulated by the governing organization, so city or county. The vast majority of them are functioning and functioning quietly, and we hear about them at the county and at the city largely by a complaint or continued complaints. So typically these are problematic properties, and the same approach seems to be the case for the county as it is for the city, that a code enforcement officer will go out, will check the property, probably repeatedly, see who's there, attempt to engage a conversation with whoever might be on the property to determine who's there, how are they using it. And it is a laborious process of building a case, a substantive case that there is an abuse going on. So there's a lot of similarity. That's the factual pieces in a nutshell. I'd really, at this point, like to turn the mics over to the people who are here so that they can talk about their experience in their communities, both positive and negative, and what they're seeing as trends. So we can kind of get our arms around what are associations grappling with, what are cities, what are communities dealing with this particular issue. So I'd like to start with Cooper, since we talked about his article, and let him kind of flesh out what he came away with. And then we'll go and talk to Chris, because they're kind of in the same vicinity in terms of what they'll be talking about. So.
Cool, thank you. Just as a show of hands, how many of people here have stayed in Airbnb or short-term rental while they've been traveling elsewhere? Pretty much everybody. I'll raise my hand. The reason I ask is my wife and I went to Nashville last year and stayed in an Airbnb, and I think to sort of get started on the issue, like to understand the attraction of them, like why people like them, is really important. And one of the cool things is, I mean, you get to see cities in a way that you have never been able to see them before as an outsider. And one cool thing about our experience in Nashville was staying kind of outside in a more like residential area. We were sort of avoided some of the mobs kind of in downtown Nashville and at the country music bars, which we hit up at night, but then we're happy to escape the rest of the time. So I think that's one of the big appeals, is this whole concept of, the tourism development people call it living like a local. This idea that you're going to local coffee shops, local restaurants that people there like, that aren't catering to tourists, and that's like one of the big appeals of it. And I think, but as I learned while I was in Nashville, they actually had kind of like a flyer up about how the Nashville City Commission is kind of struggling with this, getting tons and tons of complaints about these out-of-control bachelorette parties that are like taking over Nashville. Totally different topic, but very interesting. I don't think Sarasota's quite there yet, but we'll see. But I think one thing I came up with from the story was I guess I didn't really understand sort of how big of a business kind of this is. So I don't have the 2019 numbers, but in 2017, 67,000 guests stayed in Sarasota County strictly through Airbnb. That doesn't count the other sites. In 2018, a year later, that number was up to 100,000 people. And I'm sure it was higher in 2019, I would guess. 2018, that led to $22.8 million in revenue for property owners here in Sarasota County. And overall, Airbnb has 6 million listings, 100,000 cities. So this problem is only kind of mushrooming and getting bigger, and I think the amount of money at stake in some of these disputes is one thing that kind of really impressed upon me. So I think to kind of do a pro and con thing, the pro, sort of if you're interested in having an Airbnb or a short-term rental, obviously monetary. So I mean, it's a way for you to kind of, if you live in the Sarasota area and you're not already working in the tourist industry, it's a chance for you to capitalize on the incredible attractions that this area has for tourism, which has been a part of Sarasota forever. But when you talk to Airbnb hosts, they kind of name all these other things as well. These other benefits that come with it. A lot of them talk about like these social interactions of becoming friends with people who have come and stayed in their places, and have even led to you hear anecdotally these stories about somebody who stayed in an Airbnb in Gillespie Park, for example. They fell in love with the neighborhood and actually bought a house there and decided to move there. I don't know, there's no real way to quantify that, but I mean, you have heard those anecdotes, and I think they're real. I don't know exactly how big of an impact that has on the local economy. You talk to local businesses, and some of them will also say that they appreciate the fact that it drives tourists to parts of Sarasota where they're not ordinarily going to get to if they're staying in a hotel downtown or staying out on the beach. So they're being exposed to a different side of Sarasota. Their money is going into businesses that usually caters to locals, and so they're